Welcome to the Marketing to SMEs podcast. We're talking to the world's leading brands about how they work with the most innovative founders across the country. Well, thank you very, very much for joining us today to share some of your stories, a bit about what you're doing at Aviva. Well, Lisa, I don't know if you want to go ahead and give yourself a bit of an introduction.
Yeah, sure. So I'm SME Lead for Group Protection at Aviva. And essentially what that means is that I'm on the hook for making sure that we are as easy to do business with and focusing on looking at all the SMEs' needs across all of our group protection products. So that's group life cover, group income protection, and group critical illness.
And from what I've seen, you've had quite a long career at Aviva, but not always necessarily in this SME space. So tell me a bit about your career so far and how you made that jump within the business.
Yeah, sure. So I have been with Aviva for about 17 years now, and I've held multiple different roles over that time. The most recent one prior to my SME role would have been as strategy manager for group protection, and that kind of led me into my current role. So it became quite apparent to me while I was acting as strategy manager that we did have quite a gap in our strategy when it came to SMEs. We potentially weren't placing enough focus on what is a key growth area.
And what are the, I suppose, was there any shock to the systems when it came to actually moving across to focusing on SMEs that's very different to what you'd seen previously?
I think it wasn't necessarily a shock so much as a steep learning curve, very much around, although I'd worked across multiple different customer segments in my previous roles, having the opportunity to just focus on one segment and to also recognise that potentially the level of insight we'd had in that segment wasn't strong, and how much work there was to do for us to rectify that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a mammoth task, isn't it? So Aviva is so well known, but predominantly well known for its car, home insurance for individuals. So how do you go about actually getting out there and educating people, predominantly SME leaders, that this product is there for them and you can really help them?
Yeah, so just to put a bit of context around that, we're looking at, so SMEs, 99% of the UK's businesses. When it comes to group protection, only about 6 or 7% of eligible SMEs actually have group protection cover. So we're talking about an enormous protection gap. And that is partially because it's maybe not the first type of protection they seek out when they're setting up a business, but largely because they just don't know it exists or they don't know the benefit of it. It's one of those products, essentially, that until the worst happens, you don't know how valuable it is to you. So huge amount of time needed to increase the awareness of what's out there, and not just the contractual benefits. So a lot of our products actually give additional services and support that can be phenomenally helpful to companies, in particular SMEs, who maybe don't have the kind of infrastructure a large corporate would. So things like wellbeing support services, employee assistance programs, training material around mental health for line managers, things like that. Stuff that they can get access to through our products that are just kind of like added extras.
And I guess the first sort of step or first hurdle of this is, and you've touched on it a little bit there, but is actually defining what an SME is to you. It's such a huge range of businesses. So who do you sort of look after at Aviva, and how did you define that?
So within group protection, we've tried to make that really, really simple. And for us, for our product type, it's companies of 3 to 250 lives. That's not to say that if it's a company with less than 3 lives that we can't help. My colleagues in our individual protection area can look after those with business protection and relevant life cover. So there's also support there for them as well. But for our product type, it's 3 to 250 lives, and that's as simple as we keep it. And
that's broad range of sectors, industries.
Yeah. Any sector, any turnover, all of that is irrelevant when it comes to our product type. If you've got 3 to 250 lives, we can hopefully help you.
And again, that's quite broad as well. So do you find the messaging needs to change then for the 3, 5, 10 employees compared to a 200 plus employee company?
So that's something we're kind of still on a bit of a learning journey with, if I'm brutally honest. So historically, we've put out messaging for our product that same messaging would go out for a large corporate as it would for an SME. So even before you start breaking SME down, we've got sort of a universal message that goes out. And that can be okay in some of the communications, but actually creating a narrative that's much more meaningful for an SME is something we've worked really hard on over the last year, stripping back some of the technical jargon that sits around it, looking at the solution might still work for an SME, but their reasons for taking it out might be different. So, for example, with a large corporate, group protection was often something that would be used to entice talent, or it would be there to mitigate risks if they had key people that they wanted to provide extra protection for. And just because it's almost an expectation, it becomes a bit of a hygiene factor in a lot of large corporates. Whereas the purchasing behaviours and the needs that we're trying to meet in an SME space may well be very different, and they will vary from SME to SME. One of the things that I'm exploring at the moment is, irrespective of sector or size of SME, do we see a difference between a brick and mortar SME or a digital-led SME? Are their needs and expectations different? Is the way they want to communicate with us different? So we're very much in a space at the moment of gathering as much insight as we can, and we're just in listening mode with that.
I'll tell you
educate us.
The other thing I always find really interesting when you're dealing with that broader range is actually who you're talking to in the SMEs. So I assume in the earlier days it's the founder, and then that may transition as they build out their team and hand off responsibilities. So how do you juggle that? And how do you sort of know ideally when you're going to be targeting someone different? So
there's not a simple answer to that. For us as a business area, our product is heavily intermediated. So anywhere between 95 and 98% intermediated, which means that the brokers play a huge role in how we interact with SMEs. So we will have different ways that we will try and interact with new customers versus existing ones. Once they're an existing customer, depending on the relationship we've got with the broker and with the client, we will have direct contact. And obviously, if the worst happens and they come through a claims or a rehabilitation journey, we're absolutely interacting with them directly. And we'll use that not only to resolve the problem as it occurs, but to educate on the other benefits that are available to them, things like that. How else can we support them? What other needs have they got that we might be able to look to dovetail with? But when it comes to new business, it's heavily intermediated, and for us, we are quite reliant on the brokers knowing who at the group we should be talking to, and that can vary massively from your situations where you've got a team of 3 people who are wearing multiple hats and doing multiple roles within a business, to when those businesses are getting slightly bigger and maybe they've brought in an HR person or a benefits manager. But that will vary as well, and it won't just be determined by the size of the business. So there are so many factors that play there, and that's one of the things that really interests me about working with SMEs, just the amount of diversity that you see in how the businesses are structured and the roles within them.
Yeah, so we were talking just before recording about just how important these brokers are and the role that they play, and I'm sure Aviva and yourself and your team are really looking for ways of getting closer to the SMEs and helping them as much as you can. How do you ensure you don't overstep your mark and protect those relationships with brokers and other sort of third parties that are important to this?
So, I mean, ultimately it's a partnership, and we view the brokers as a massively valuable part of that relationship. We aren't experts in how clients should structure their benefits packages, and as I mentioned earlier, the point at which a business considers group protection cover, whether that's when they're sorting out their pension arrangements and an IFA mentions to them, oh, have you considered group life cover? Or whether it's that they've got someone else within an SMA community who's benefited from one of our products, and that's maybe they've heard it through word of mouth and then sort out more guidance from their broker. There's so many ways they can come across our products, but ultimately it's the broker that has got the fantastic skill in being able to sit down with them and look at what are all their needs and how can they structure all the various benefits to enable them to have the capital to take out some of these products that could be massively beneficial in protecting them and their employees when the worst happens.
And do you try really sum up or showcase success stories with, you mentioned some of the SMEs that may have been really successful that are clients of yours, do you try showcase them a little bit as well?
So we absolutely do create kind of marketing collateral using case studies where possible and appropriate, but we do have to be a little bit careful around that. And it can be frustrating because having come from one of my previous roles being in the claims and rehabilitation areas, I know how powerful it can be when you see those case studies firsthand. But ultimately, a lot of these are very personal situations. And so a client has to be really, really comfortable to be sharing that information. We're talking about things that are impacting their physical and mental health, that might relate to family members. And people won't necessarily want to publicly talk about those things. So sometimes we're able to utilise case studies, which can be fantastically powerful when we can. Other times we have to almost use like theoretical examples of, if this should happen, these are all the ways we can help. And that's still useful. It's still a compelling story that you can get out of that. But there is absolutely something about when you talk one-to-one with someone who's had something crop up, whether that's, I don't know, someone's been diagnosed with cancer within the workplace, or someone's experiencing a period of really poor mental health. Seeing the work that our teams can do to help get them back on their feet, either keep them in the workplace or rehabilitate them back into the workplace and make that sustainable so they're having a rich and fulfilling home and work life, is really impactful.
How do you, so with Aviva being such an old and again well-established brand, how do you really humanize it so you are close enough to share those stories? How do you, I suppose, build the meaningful relationships with these founders?
So, I mean, ultimately, the way we would source case studies would generally be through the point at which they've come into a claims team. And our claims teams work really, really closely with the employer and the staff. So that relationship naturally becomes quite a close relationship quite rapidly when you're having conversations with someone about personal situations, critical illnesses, a death at the company. Relationships build very quickly. It's an emotive time, and therefore we've got some very highly skilled staff who specialise in building those relationships and providing appropriate support. So from that point of view, it's quite quick to build those relationships. But I'd also say when it comes to kind of humanising the brand, yes, we're a large corporate, but our business unit is quite a small business unit within that large corporate. So we benefit from being under the umbrella of Aviva with its 325-year history and its composite structure. But ultimately, we're quite a small team ourselves. And ultimately, SMEs are everywhere. They represent 7 in 10 jobs. So there's no one who doesn't know an SME. You come into contact with them all the time. On my way in here today, stopping at my local coffee shop, that's an SME. So I think it's just remembering that these are our friends, our family, they're the people we interact with every day. And when we're having those conversations with them, they're humans. They're not companies, they're humans.
I think what we find a lot of the bigger brands struggle with is that line between being very personable but also holding that professional edge. So particularly around data, for instance. So you know very, very intimate details about your clients. But then I guess there's a mark as well where you may know those intimate details around their mental health or whatever it may be, but then sending them a happy birthday message because it's their birthday, they might think, why have you got that? So how do you get that balance right where you've got this personable relationship but you're not taking that too far in a way?
So ultimately it's a professional relationship first and foremost, and they're interacting with us for a purpose. So for example, when you look at what our claims teams do, when those clients are talking to them about their personal circumstances, their medical history, things like that, there's got to be professional boundaries there. That's a confidential conversation. It remains a confidential conversation, even within the structure of the employer-employee relationship. There will be some information that's disclosed, some information that's not disclosed. And I think it's really important to maintain that, yes, we want to be personable, but it is a professional interaction. So the example you gave there, we wouldn't send a happy birthday message, let's put it that way. But we absolutely would, as part of a return to work support, we would be contacting them on their first day back in the office. How was your first day? How did that feel? Did it go okay? And our claims and rehab guys are phenomenally skilled at that. And they will tailor that on a case-by-case basis. When you're working with someone in that way, it's just about listening. It's about talking to them and saying, what is it you need from us? What frequency of contact do you want from us? Do you want us to ring you? Do you want us to email you? And it's that personal touch when it comes to the point at which potentially a lot of what's going on for them is uncomfortable. Their world's kind of been turned upside down a little bit. No one plans for getting really unwell to the point where they can't go and do their job. For a lot of people, rightly or wrongly, a lot of us define ourselves by what we do for work. So it can be massively challenging for people when the thing that they define themselves by is suddenly taken away from them.
So I guess it's really about understanding their challenges, which do change over time as well. So we've got to be conscious of that. One of the biggest challenges and things that are on founders' minds all the time is just the pace they can move. Yeah. So as a larger corporate, how do you make sure that you can keep up with that and almost not to get bogged down in your own processes?
So I think there's loads we can learn from SMEs. I mean, the adaptability and the agility, yes, they don't have some of the support structures in place that we massively benefit from, but that can also mean that they do move at a much greater pace. And I think, again, it comes down to Aviva is a huge company, but it has smaller business units within it. And it's just us making sure we're mindful about the processes we put in place, that those constantly evolve, whether it's with client needs or whether it's with legislation and regulatory changes. And that's a continuous improvement kind of setup that we have to work in.
And in terms of setup then, tell me a bit about your team structure. Is there anything that you've got wrong with that and had to change, or certain things that you found work better than others?
So we definitely experiment. It's an evolution for us in the SME space for group protection. And my role, I've got the luxury of working cradle to grave across the whole value chain. So I get involved with our propositional design, our pricing, our underwriting practices, all the way through to the claims and rehab side of things, and obviously marketing as well. And within a larger team that services large corporates, mid-market clients and SMEs, we've got people who have expertise that specifically focuses on SME, but we maintain a level of flexibility on that. They sit within wider teams because this is a growth area for us. We're conscious there is a massive protection gap, and what we don't want to do is have an overly engineered structure. We need to remain fluid in that. And as our portfolio builds, as we attract more clients, as we identify more needs out in the market, we need to be able to reshape our team quite quickly. So yeah, we try and keep it fluid.
And how do you manage the fact that although you have a couple of offices and the team seems like they're relatively spread out, how do you make sure that you've got that local feel for smaller businesses that are across the country or various countries, rather than being that big intimidating brand that's centralised?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and there's, I suppose, multiple lenses on that. Again, we rely on our brokers and our broker partners to help us with that. They are the local presence around those SME clients. But we do try and hold events that clients can connect directly with us. So, for example, for our SME clients this year, we were conscious that a lot of the wellbeing support we offer, it was harder for them to access. With a large corporate client, if you've got, 3,000 staff and you want us to go and talk to you about a certain issue, whether it's mental health in the workplace, something like that, we can turn up at a venue, we'll do a face-to-face presentation for you. It's much harder when it's SMEs. There's a sheer volume of them alone. So what we've done is we've put in place a series of quarterly webinars where we can have multiple SME clients attend virtually all at once. We can hold live sessions, live Q&As, and make the training personal to them, so that we're interacting with them live on those sessions and getting a much better feel for what aspects of the training and the expertise we can offer are of interest to them, and we shape the training as we go.
I suppose that creates a real sense of community then as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. So look, we have just a few minutes left. So for those that are just moving into the SME space within a big brand, what advice would you have for them being completely new to this area? I would probably say we need to listen to SMEs more. Having that humility that, yes, there is a lot as a large corporate that we benefit from and that we can share certain expertise with SMEs. We can hopefully help educate and increase awareness around the kind of products and services we can offer. But we just need to be listening more. We need to understand what is it they're looking for, what keeps them up at night. I'm confident the products and services that I'm able to offer absolutely will meet those needs. I've seen firsthand how beneficial they can be. But we need to listen to their concerns, their fears, their feedback on what's out there, and shape our propositions accordingly. And who are you a big fan of personally as a SME or admire from a business standpoint?
That's a really tough question. I think it's really difficult to single out any one company or one entity. And I think for me, the thing that probably all of the companies that I admire have in common is around their value set. So things like sustainability, having a well-being focus, a level of innovation. It's tough setting up a business and running a business. So anyone who's going to give that a go gets my instant respect. But seeing companies that really understand well-being in particular, I mean, and in a holistic sense, so societal, financial, physical and mental as kind of the four key components of that, and how that then plays out with if you're building a sustainable business. I think that's absolutely key. So any of the SMEs I interact with that show interest in those areas, their values that Aviva hold dear as well. So I always think that's a good sign. If the values of your own company and the values of your customers align, you've kind of got a perfect marriage there.
I always think it's slightly easier for smaller businesses to have that North Star of a purpose, whether it be sustainability or something else, and it's easier to maintain as the founder has direct access to everyone within the company. Is that something that's tough at a company as large as Aviva?
I think it can be challenging, but I think we've done a really good job of that, particularly over the last few years. I mean, I think Amanda, our CEO, has been really, really clear in setting out Aviva's purpose and Aviva's commitments, and we've certainly been seeing a lot more conversation around both sustainability and well-being within our business and in our communications out to our clients and our shareholders.
Lisa, thank you so much for coming in and for sharing your experiences and advice. I think it's going to be so beneficial for all those working in the SME space. So thank you once again.
Pleasure.